I never thought I'd see Jesus. The idea would have seemed absurd to me even a week before it happened. I'm Muslim, born into the faith, raised in it, devoted to it. We honor Isa ibn Maryam, peace be upon him, as one of the greatest prophets God ever sent to guide humanity. We believe in his miraculous birth, his healing powers, his wisdom, but we don't worship him. We don't pray to him. We don't expect him to appear in visions or dreams, reaching across the centuries to speak directly to us. That's not how our tradition works. That's not how revelation comes in Islam. And yet, on the night of August 15th, 2023, exhausted beyond measure after 18 consecutive hours managing a security crisis in the northern provinces, rebels crossing borders, civilians caught in crossfire, my soldiers stretched in trying to protect villages that had known nothing but suffering for years, I collapsed into my bed still wearing my uniform. I didn't even remove my boots. I simply fell backward onto the mattress, my mind still racing with logistics, casualty reports, strategic decisions that could mean life or death for hundreds of people. Sleep took me instantly, dragging me down into darkness. And then, without transition, without the usual fuzzy drift of normal dreaming, I found myself standing somewhere else entirely. It wasn't quite a room. It wasn't quite outdoors. The space existed somewhere between physical reality and something else, something I had no vocabulary to describe. There were no clear walls, yet I felt enclosed. There was no obvious sky, yet I sensed infinite space above me. The light came from everywhere at once, not harsh, not blinding, but present in a way that made shadows impossible. The air felt thick, weighted with significance, like the pressure that builds in your chest right before a thunderstorm breaks and releases all its violence on the world below. I stood there, confused, trying to orient myself. My last conscious memory was my bedroom in the presidential compound, the ceiling fan turning slowly above me, the distant sounds of guards outside my door. Now I was here, wherever here was, and the transition had been so abrupt that my mind struggled to catch up with my senses. That's when I saw him. He stood perhaps 20 feet away, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. And I knew, instantly, without doubt, without question, exactly who he was. I can't explain how I knew. There was no voice from heaven announcing his identity. There was no halo, no glowing aura, none of the visual markers I'd seen in countless paintings and icons throughout my life. But I knew with absolute certainty that I was looking at Jesus of Nazareth, the prophet Christians called the Son of God, the man Muslims honored as a Messiah who would return at the end of days. He didn't look anything like the European paintings that dominated Western religious art. No pale skin. No soft, gentle features. No flowing robes that seemed to float around him like he existed in a perpetual gentle breeze. Instead, he looked Middle Eastern, unmistakably so, skin darkened by years under the harsh sun, weathered by wind and desert conditions. His hands were callous, the hands of a carpenter who'd spent decades working with rough wooden crude tools. His clothing was simple, practical, dusty from travel. He looked like he'd walked a long way to get here, like he'd known hard labor and harder times. But his eyes held something I'd never seen in another human being. A depth that seemed to contain centuries, millennia, eternities. When he looked at me, I felt simultaneously exposed down to my deepest secrets and completely, utterly known. Not judged, not condemned, but seen. Truly seen in a way I'd never experienced before. It was terrifying and comforting at the same time. Ibrahim, he said, and his voice carried qualities that shouldn't be able to exist together. It was gentle, almost tender, like a father speaking to a beloved son. But it also commanded absolute attention, like thunder rolling across mountains, impossible to ignore. Both water and stone, both whisper and shout. I wanted to prostrate myself immediately. In Islamic tradition, when you encounter a prophet, you show the ultimate respect. You bow completely, touching your forehead to the ground, acknowledging the vast distance between your limited humanity and a divinely appointed status. My body moved instinctively to drop to my knees. But before I could complete the motion, he gestured for me to remain standing. The gesture was small, just a slight movement of his hand, but it stopped me completely. "We don't have much time," he said, and there was urgency in his voice now, cutting through the gentle tone. "There's something you need to understand. Something I came specifically to warn you about. Events are already in motion. Ibrahim, choices are approaching. And you need to be prepared for what's coming. My heart hammered in my chest. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. This had to be a dream. It couldn't be anything else. I'm Muslim. Jesus doesn't visit Muslims in dreams. That's not how divine communication works in our theology. Prophets don't appear to people centuries after their deaths to deliver personal messages. If God wants to communicate with believers, he does so through the Quran, through prayer, through reflection and study, not through visions of long-dead prophets appearing in impossible spaces between waking and sleeping. But it felt more real than waking life. The ground beneath my feet felt solid, substantial in a way that dream ground never does. When I shifted my weight, I could feel the texture of whatever I was standing on. The air moving across my face felt genuine, carrying scents I couldn't quite identify, something like desert sage, something like rain about to fall. And his presence felt undeniable, concrete, more real than many actual physical people I'd met. I don't understand. I managed to say, my voice sounding strange in this space. Why would you come to me? I'm not even Christian. I honor you as a prophet, as a great teacher and healer, as someone God sent to guide the children of Israel back to righteousness. But I don't worship you. I don't pray in your name. Why would you appear to someone outside your faith? Yes, he said, and something like sadness crossed his features. But that's exactly why I'm here. Because those who claim my name have forgotten what I actually taught. They worship me but don't follow me. They build churches in my honor but ignore the principles I died defending. They sing songs about my love but practice the opposite of everything I stood for. And Muslims honor me, respect me, include me in their theological framework. But they don't fully understand what I came to do, what I tried to accomplish, what I was willing to die for. He took a step closer, and the intensity of his presence increased. And because you, Ibrahim Traoré, captain, revolutionary, leader of Burkina Faso, you are standing at a crossroads. You're about to make decisions that will determine the fate of thousands, maybe millions of people. You took power believing you could do better than those who came before. You convinced yourself that you were different, that you wouldn't fall into the same traps that had destroyed every other revolutionary leader in Africa's history. You told yourself that you'd serve the people, not dominate them, that you'd liberate them, not exploit them. His eyes bored into me. But you're already feeling it, aren't you? The pull, the temptation, the voice that whispers you need to be strong, to be firm, to not show weakness. The pressure from your allies to take harder actions, to be more ruthless with your enemies. The offers from foreign powers that sound so reasonable, so pragmatic. The loyalty you feel toward people who fought beside you, even when they betray the principles you all claim to believe in. I wanted to protest, to defend myself. But he was right. I had been feeling it. Every single thing he described had already started happening. The whispers, the pressure, the compromises that seemed small individually but added up to something terrible. He gestured, and suddenly the space around us shifted. We were no longer in that strange in-between place. Now we stood on a hill overlooking a city I recognized immediately, Ouagadougou, my capital. But something was catastrophically wrong. Smoke rose from multiple points throughout the urban landscape, thick columns of black smoke that spoke of buildings burning, of destruction and chaos. I could hear gunfire in the distance, the distinctive crack of automatic weapons, the deeper boom of explosions. People ran through the streets below us in panic, carrying whatever possessions they could grab, fleeing some unseen threat. What is this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. When is this? 6 months from now, Jesus said quietly, if you choose wrong, if you listen to the voices telling you to be strong, to be ruthless, to prioritize security over freedom, if you convince yourself that maintaining power is more important than serving people. This is what happens. This is where that path leads. The scene shifted again, dissolving and reforming into something new. Now we were inside what looked like a military command center. Banks of monitors lined the walls. Maps covered tables. And there I was, older, harder, with eyes that looked dead inside. I sat at a desk signing documents without reading them, authorizing actions without questioning them, giving orders in a flat, emotionless tone that suggested I'd stopped caring about the human cost of my decisions. I watched myself, this future version that might exist, and felt sick. I'd become the very thing I'd fought against. The tyrant, the oppressor, the leader who'd lost his soul somewhere along the path to power. This is what happens when you forget why you took power in the first place. Jesus said, his voice heavy with sorrow. When you start believing that maintaining control is more important than serving people. When security becomes more important than justice. When you become willing to do anything, sacrifice anyone, betray any principle just to stay in power. When the revolution becomes about you instead of about the people you claim to save. I started to protest. Everyone says that. He cut me off, and now his voice carried an edge. Every single leader who's ever become a tyrant started exactly where you are now. They all believed they were different, that they were special, that they could hold power without being corrupted by it. They all told themselves they were the exception to history's rules. But power changes people, Ibrahim. It whispers to you constantly. It tells you that you're indispensable, that only you can save your country, that any action is justified if it keeps you in control, that anyone who opposes you is an enemy of the people. The scene shifted once more, and this time what I saw made my stomach turn. A prison. People being tortured in ways I won't describe here. Families separated. Children crying for parents who would never return. Dissidents disappearing in the night. Their bodies found days later as warnings to others who might speak out. And there I was again, that dead-eyed future version of myself, authorizing it all. Signing the orders. Justifying it as necessary for national security. Telling myself that these weren't innocent people, just enemies of the state. That this wasn't oppression, just maintaining order. No, I said, shaking my head violently, trying to deny what I was seeing. No, I would never do this. I took power specifically to free Burkina Faso from exactly this kind of oppression. I would die before I became this. I would rather fail completely than succeed as a monster. Would you? Jesus asked, and his eyes seemed to see straight through me into the places I tried to hide even from myself. Or would you tell yourself that you're different? That you're not torturing innocent people, just legitimate enemies? That you're not oppressing your people, just maintaining necessary order? That these extreme measures are temporary, just until the situation stabilizes? That's what they all tell themselves. Ibrahim. That's what Compare told himself when he killed Thomas Sankara. That's what every dictator in history has believed while they committed their atrocities. They were all convinced they were the exception, that their circumstances were special, that history would vindicate their harsh methods. I felt tears starting to form. Not just from the horror of what he was showing me, but from the recognition that he was absolutely right. I could already feel those temptations pulling at me. I could hear those justifications whispering in my mind during difficult moments. I could sense myself starting to slide down that slope, telling myself each small compromise was necessary, was different, was justified by the larger mission. Why are you showing me this? I asked, my voice breaking. What do you want from me? Do you want me to give up? To step down? To admit I can't do this? Jesus looked at me with an expression of profound compassion mixed with absolute urgency. I came to warn you about 3 things, he said. 3 specific temptations that will come to you in the months ahead. 3 moments where you will have to choose between the path of power and the path of service, between domination and liberation, between becoming a tyrant and remaining a servant. If you choose wrong even once, you'll start down the road you just saw. The slide begins with a single compromise, and then it accelerates until you can't stop it anymore. But if you choose right all 3 times, you might avoid becoming what you most fear. He raised his hand, and 3 images appeared in the air between us, shimmering like heat mirages in the desert. He pointed to the first shimmering image, and it expanded before my eyes like a window opening into the future. I saw myself in a conference room I recognized, the secure meeting space in the military command center where I held my most sensitive discussions. Around the table sat the faces of men I trusted, officers who had supported my coup, who had risked everything to help me seize power from a corrupt government. But the expressions on their faces in this vision were hard, urgent, almost aggressive. The first temptation will come from your allies, Jesus said, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher explaining something crucial to a student whose life depends on understanding. It will come from people you trust, people who fought beside you, people who genuinely believe they are helping you. That's what makes it so dangerous. It won't feel like temptation. It will feel like wisdom, like practical advice, like necessary action. In the vision, I watched as my security chief, a man I'd known for 15 years, who'd served under me in 3 different deployments, slid a document across the table toward my future self. "We have intelligence," he was saying, his face grave with concern. "Multiple sources confirming plots against the government. Opposition groups are organizing. Foreign agents are infiltrating our networks, and we have evidence of coordination with elements of the old regime. Captain, we need to act now, before they can consolidate." I saw myself in that future moment pick up the document, scanning the list of names. Journalists I recognized, activists who'd been critical of some of my policies, opposition politicians who'd called for reforms I hadn't yet implemented. Some were people I suspected of legitimate grievances rather than treasonous intent. Others I simply didn't know well enough to judge. "These people are planning a coup," another officer insisted in the vision, leaning forward with intensity. "Not next year. Not next month. Soon. We're talking weeks, maybe days. We need to arrest them immediately. All of them. We need to strike hard and strike fast. Show strength. Show that you won't tolerate threats to stability. Send a message that anyone who challenges this government will face serious consequences. They'll use the language of security and stability," Jesus explained to me as we watched this scene unfold. "They'll talk about intelligence reports and credible threats and the responsibility you have to protect the revolution. They'll remind you of how fragile your position is, how many enemies you have, how easily everything could collapse if you show weakness. And they won't be entirely wrong. Ibrahim, that's the insidious part. There really will be people plotting against you. There really will be threats. But what they're actually telling you, beneath all that reasonable-sounding security talk, is to choose fear over faith, control over trust, domination over service." In the vision, I watched the debate continue. Some officers advocated for mass arrests. Others suggested targeted assassinations to avoid the political complications of public trials. One recommended simply making the troublemakers disappear. No arrests, no trials, no evidence, just absence. The discussion grew heated as different factions pushed their preferred approaches to neutralizing threats. And I could see my future self wavering, feeling the weight of their arguments, sensing the genuine concern behind their recommendations. They weren't evil men. They weren't power-hungry monsters. They were soldiers who'd spent their entire careers dealing with threats, who'd been trained to identify dangers and eliminate them before those dangers could materialize into actual harm. From their perspective, they were giving sound tactical advice. "When this moment comes, and it will come within weeks of you waking from this dream, you must refuse," Jesus said, and his voice carried absolute conviction. "You must remember why you took power in the first place. Not to dominate people, but to serve them. Not to control them, but to liberate them. Not to make them fear you, but to restore their dignity. Not to silence criticism, but to prove through your actions that criticism isn't necessary because you're actually serving their interests." But what if they're right? I asked, pulling my attention away from the vision to look directly at him. What if showing mercy, what if refusing to take preemptive action, gives my enemies time to organize? Time to strike back? Time to undo everything we've worked for? What if my compassion gets people killed? What if my principles cost lives that could have been saved by harder measures? Jesus held my gaze, and I saw something in his eyes that looked like recognition, like he'd asked himself these exact questions 2,000 years ago in another context. "Then you lose while trying to do right," he said simply, "which is infinitely better than winning while doing wrong." Ibrahim, I was executed as a failed revolutionary. By every worldly measure, I lost completely. My movement was scattered. My closest followers abandoned me. My enemies celebrated my death as proof that I'd been a fraud all along. I lost everything. But I stayed faithful to my mission. I refused to compromise my principles even when compromise might have saved my life. I chose to die rather than become what I opposed. He stepped closer, and I could feel the intensity radiating from him like heat from a fire. "You must do the same, even if it costs you everything. Even if it means you get overthrown. Even if it means you die like Thomas Sankara died. Because the alternative, winning by becoming a tyrant, isn't actually winning. It's just a different form of losing. It's losing your soul while gaining the world, and what does that profit anyone? The first vision began to fade, but not before I saw one more thing. My future self in that meeting room, faced with that list of names and those urgent recommendations, having to make a choice. The vision ended before I could see which choice he made, leaving me suspended in uncertainty. Would I pass this test, or would I fail it and start down the path to tyranny? Before I could ask, Jesus was already pointing to the second image. This one showed a very different kind of meeting. Instead of a military command center, I saw an elegant room decorated in a style that suggested European influence. Expensive furniture, classical paintings on the walls, the kind of space designed to make you feel sophisticated and important. Across a polished mahogany table sat men in expensive suits. The French ambassador, I recognize, along with representatives from other Western powers and international financial institutions. The second temptation will come disguised as pragmatism, Jesus said, as reasonable compromise, as practical necessity. They'll offer you everything you need, money for development, weapons for security, diplomatic recognition that will legitimize your government in the eyes of the international community. And all they'll ask in return are some small accommodations, some minor adjustments to your positions, some reasonable compromises that any sensible leader would make. In the vision, I watched as the French ambassador smiled warmly at my future self, speaking in that smooth diplomatic language that made everything sound beneficial to both parties. Captain Traoré, France wants to normalize relations with your government. We recognize that Burkina Faso needs development, needs infrastructure, needs the kind of support that only a partnership with established powers can provide. We're prepared to offer significant aid packages. We're talking hundreds of millions of euros for schools, hospitals, roads, agricultural development, military assistance to help you combat terrorism in the north, diplomatic support in regional and international forums. My future self leaned forward, clearly interested, and what would France expect in return? The ambassador's smile never wavered. Simply cooperation, partnership, mutual respect. Would expect you to moderate some of your rhetoric about colonialism. We understand the historical grievances, but constantly rehashing the past doesn't help anyone. Would expect continued market access for French companies that have invested heavily in Burkina Faso's economy. Would expect you to work with us on regional security issues, rather than constantly challenging French influence in West Africa. Nothing unreasonable, just the kind of normal relationship any sovereign nation maintains with its partners.